Hello Year 9, welcome along to another lesson, and we're continuing the theme of unseen poetry with the theme of protest going on throughout those. So as you can see on the screen there, that's the title I'd like to write at the top of your work today, please. Please write Unseen Poetry : John Agard. That's the name of the poet we're going to be looking at. And actually the reason I've got the picture of the poetry anthology page there is that the poem from today actually comes from the anthology. It is one that you will end up studying for your GCSEs, but like we did with London, we're going to treat it as if it were an unseen poem, because to you it is. So I won't be doing too much of the teaching around some of the bits in there. We're just going to be focusing on the bits that we can understand as an unseen poem. And a reminder I've put on the screen there that all of this is part of GCSE English Literature. It's part of the paper 2, because there are 2 papers for literature, as there are 2 papers for your language GCSE as well, so 4 in total. This is paper 2 and it's section C. The paper is split into 3 sections. Section A is in spectacles, section B is the anthology poetry, and section C is unseen poetry. So let's get moving then. And actually the first thing I want you to consider for me, and actually write down task number 1, so write task 1 on your page for me as well please above this. Consider your own schooling here, I've pronounced that in a funny way, your own schooling. How many links can you find in what you've studied to black culture or black history? And can you write down any of the topics or things that you know that you've studied? And that can be from primary school right up to secondary school, but you're going to want to pause this video now and write down some things. And if you cannot write down anything, could you just write down a sentence about what you think that shows? So something along the lines of, I can't think of any links to black culture or history, which I think shows what. So pause this video now. I'm going to go quiet just for a few seconds to let you pause and have a go at task number 1. Okay, so I'll have a look at those when you upload those to show my homework. Just wanted to show you this article. It came out a couple of days ago. It was on BBC News. That's where I've got this from. And it's about this girl here. You see Chiefy Oakley, she's called. And she moved from London to Cornwall, it says on the right-hand side, with her mother at 6 years old. She'd never experienced any racism when she'd lived in London. And I won't read all the article there, but it shows you that Cornwall is predominantly white. About 98.2% of people in Cornwall identify as white. And we're one of the least diverse regions. But I wanted to read that paragraph, the second chunk near the bottom there, which just links to today's poem. It said, and this is from her, "We barely covered any black history at secondary school, except for one topic on the slave trade when I was about 14 or 15 years old. It resulted in a teacher singling me out in front of the whole class of white students, asking me how I felt to be the only black child. I just remember this sinking feeling. I was already very aware I was the only black child in that classroom. I was really embarrassed and felt naked. I remember my mum being very upset about it." And it's very hard for many of us to actually put ourselves into her shoes there, but I think that maybe just captures this idea of education in this country, not just in Cornwall, but education in this country as a whole, and just how white focused it is. And having that in your head really will sort of help you understand the poem a little bit better today, because the poem is about that. I mean, even think about GCSE, it's not our choice, but the texts you're studying include Shakespeare, who's a white man. You've got Charles Dickens, who's a white man. You've got J.B. Priestley for Inspector Calls, who's a white man. All of these are white authors, and therefore they have a very sort of white view of the world. And it just is trying to highlight actually for the sort of how diverse Britain can be, how undiverse, which isn't a word, but non-diverse the education is. But anyway, just have that as your thought in your head about black people featuring in the education. And then what I'm going to want you to do is, this is John Agard. He's the one who's written the poem today, the poem which you will study for GCSE, and the poem that today is unseen. The best thing you can do, and the thing you need to do right now, is pause the video and actually click on that link which I've put onto the slide which I've uploaded for you, and it will take you to a YouTube video which has got the poem on screen, and also you can hear him actually reading his poem, and I'll see what you think about it. So I'm going to go quiet to let you pause now. Okay, in theory, you've now just watched that. He really does sound very song-like. He's very entertaining, John Agard, and it's very deliberate, but also it gives it a very light-hearted tone with all that rhyme that's going on in that poem as well. But actually, it gives a very light-hearted tone to what is a very serious topic as well. So there is the poem then, and I always go through these 4 steps with my classes about how to approach an unseen poem. So step 1, which is the one you've just done or certainly heard, read the poem, highlighting anything that leaps out at you. Now I'm going to put a copy of this poem online for you as well, so if you can, as some of you have been, print it and have a go at actually highlighting the lines which leap out at you. And if you're going to do that, then I'm going to say do that now. And anyone who hasn't got the ability to do that, then you need to pause this slide in a second before I reveal mine. So just look at some of the things and see what leaps out at you, and then let's see if they leapt out at me. So I'm going to go quiet again. Okay, so I'll click on then. This doesn't mean that if you chose something different that you're wrong. It's about personal interpretation, but things which leap out at you are really important when it comes to highlighting text in English. Those are some of the things. I didn't highlight all of the dem tell me's because they're all throughout the poem. It's a repeating sort of refrain, you could call that. But dem tell me, because it's got the imperative. Now make a note of that. Write that down somewhere, Year 9, because you're going to need that later. It includes the imperative. Imperatives are what we call the bossy verbs, the commands, like then tell me. It's like sit down, play with that, be quiet. Those are all imperatives. He uses that all the way through. There's the imagery on those second lines as well. They bandage up my eye, like to cover up your eyes is almost like, and he says to blind me to my own identity, is almost like his own history has been taken away from him, been blinded because he's only ever shown the white history. And like he says, all that, and about that is a word, he says that, but that is a word which comes a few times, and it's almost just sounds very like angry, frustrated might be a good word with it as well. And you see that then never tell me is a repeating line as well. So he uses in this poem, the method he uses a lot of is repetition, and I'm going to focus on that in a minute. But that's step 1. Step 2 and task number 2, which I'm going to want you to pause down and write a sentence or two for me in a moment. Step 2, task 2, look at the title and its connotations. The poem is called Checking Out Me History. Can you work out the message of the poem? Partly from that title, but partly from what I've told you now and what you've heard so far. Can you write down, please, a couple of sentences? What do you think John Agard is trying to tell us, trying to teach us, or trying to show us? Think about something you may never have considered until you've heard these things and what I've told you about black education. So pause this video. I'm going to go quiet again for you. Okay. I'll look at those answers. The green bit, by the way, is just me highlighting the rhyme, the fact it's got rhyme all the way through, making it very light-hearted. You would then decide which 3 lines you would choose and actually label those lines. But we haven't got time to do that, or we haven't got copies of the poem necessarily today. If you have, brilliant. What we're going to do is actually construct an answer together, the PEAR structure, and I want to do that. So I'm rushing through a little bit because I want to save time for it. Task number 3 is we're going to live write an answer together before you do your own paragraph. This means, Year 9, I want you to actually write down the things I write or the things I type on the screen. You're going to write that at the same time, and then the final task is you actually having to go a second paragraph on your own. So what you need to do is pause this screen right now for me and write down the question that you see on the screen there. Okay, and I'm just going to give you my secret word in a second just to check you're all paying attention. The secret words are cup of tea. That's what you're going to write at the top of your page. And you're going to draw me a picture of a mug, please, and then I'll know you've listened to this video completely thoroughly. So write the words cup of tea and mug, or not, I haven't got to write mug, draw a mug at the top of your page. Now, this question, feelings about British education. So let me just quickly copy and paste that onto this Word document here. Oh, well, British education, fine. I haven't got time to muck around with that. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with his surname. So Agard, and we're going to say what he thinks. So you've already done this for task number 2. What does he show? Agard illustrates his frustrations at the British education system in this poem, showing us he feels, what does he want? Well, it's going to do with black education, actually including like black matters into education. Shows he feels that it is not diverse, is a nice word for that, diverse, and needs to include more links to black culture, I'm going to call it. You could say history there as well. There's my P, nearly done, but the other thing I always must do is now pick out a method. So he does this through his use of repetition, which we can see when he tells us about black culture he was never taught. I'll show you that on the poem in a second, by which I mean this. If I just go back a slide here, he talks about them never tell me about Shaka the Zulu, they never tell me about Mary C. Cole or Nanny de Maroon. So the key line is, but them never tell me. He was never taught. When he writes, but them never tell me. Now I need to unpick that and actually analyse. So I've done my P, and the quote there is my E, and I've tried to embed it a little bit. It was quite hard to embed that one, but writes them never tell me. By repeating this line, Agard is, and then you decide what is he doing. So you could pick out a word in that quote, but in my one there's not really necessarily a word. I'll come on to that in a second. By repeating that, Agard is, and when you repeat something you make it stand out, therefore you are emphasising all of the things he was never taught. The word, if you don't know what word type it is, like adjective, verb, etc., it doesn't matter. You can just use the word word. You get given just as many marks when it comes to the exam. The word never being repeated really strongly has connotations, and then I have to stop and think about, okay, never, never, never really has strong connotations of being controlled, is what popped into my head, being controlled by somebody else and not being allowed to see your own history is what sort of springs into my mind with that one. Okay, I could then try and pick on another word. I don't think with such a short quote I'm really going to be able to, but the word never has strong connotation, somebody else not being allowed to see your own history. And what else would I say with that? Never. The tone is the other thing you can always talk about here if you're in doubt. It creates, because this, by adding a second idea here, Year 9, if I just stop my paragraph there, it's okay, but I'm really trying to push myself to think deeper. By doing that, I will gain higher marks on the exam. It creates a very negative and almost dark tone to the poem. He sounds like he has no sort of freedom. And then finally, I'm going to link to John Agard's message. Throughout this poem, we see how Agard, and this is, I'll highlight this in a second, this phrase, Agard teaches us that his education was not diverse enough and was focused on white, excluding the achievements Now what I'm going to do there, that's the end of my paragraph. That final bit there I've just done, that is my R step, like the reader and the writer, and it sort of is showing my understanding. Agard teaches us. That's a sentence starter right there that you could use. You could use that one. He does this through his use of is another sentence starter. I'm highlighting and underlining these because these are key ones that you could use, just like that one. And you also want to talk about the connotations. Now, I'm very, very nearly out of time, so the next step I would do is I would focus on, and your paragraph needs to be about the dem tell me. Use that. That is also the repetition that Agard has used there. Repetition is the method which you want to pick out at the start here, dem tell me, but I'll just give you some clues as well. Think about them, how them sort of captures everybody in once, and then also you want to talk about the imperative. about tell. When you're being told something, it's a lack of control. So some of your ideas will be similar to my paragraph, but try and see how much you can sort of bring it on and use the work you've done throughout the lesson as well. So I'm very nearly out of time. I hope that was of use for you, Year 9. My intention on Friday is to set you up something slightly different like I did last time with the signs, but as I'm very nearly out of time, I'm going to say thanks for watching all the way through, submit your work later, and have a nice day. Bye.